Welcome to the Elokus podcast. This is class number 18 in the discourse Naso Rosh 5672. Fourth discourse in the overall book. Today we're going to start chapter 15. We just have a tiny bit of chapter 14 to complete. Gewalt. Okay, so this podcast is for all the deep souls who are tuning and acclimating themselves already for the days of Mashiach. In the time of Mashiach, the world will not be occupied, as Maimonides says, with anything else but to know Hashem. And the purpose of these classes is just to allow yourself to delve into the endlessness of the Ein Sof. So here we go. We are concluding the chapter 14 as mentioned earlier. So with the last things, we were holding all the way, like just a few lines before the end of Perek Yudalid, which is chapter 14. And we were learning how the main definitions and limitations are in the vessels. And when the lights go into the vessels, the lights also become defined through the vessels. But the lights inherently are still simple. However, the lights that are simple, we were learning, like the light of the intelligence, the lights of the Chachma Bin Adas, or the lights of the emotions, the energy, the main reason they become imprinted with the vessels is because subtly they have already a subtle connection to these vessels. Because even their source, where the lights come from, in the essential powers of the soul, these lights, or in the divine, it would mean in Keser, the lights as well, like Chachma Stima, the concealed level of Chachma, or he referred to it as Chesed, as it is in Atik Yomin, in the Ancient of Days, or Gevura, as it is in Atik Yomin, which is in the Ancient of Days, which means all these levels of pre-Kalim, there are no vessels there, it's pure light, and yet they have already leanings to these Sefirot, to the attributes, to the particulars, but because they are so abstract and so clean, so to speak, and so undefined, for that reason, they lend themselves for exchangeability, as we spoke. They're flexible, they can move this way and that way, although they are not absolutely pashut and simple. So again, there are the definitions of the kalim, and compared to the kalim, a very important point we were learning, compared to the vessels, which are have real definition, the oiros, the lights, are called belima, without substance, because you wouldn't even notice that there's any substance of them, any character to them before they come into the vessels. Once they go into the vessels do a good job on the light and taint the light according to the vessels. But the only reasons the vessels can do that to the light is because the light is already has already a shaykhus, if we say, some kind of a relationship to these characteristics. Okay, and he says, and the last thing we learned was v'imkein. Let's just go back over here one line. V'imkein masha oires nikra belima. This that we say that the lights are called without any substance, belimahus, that they don't have any character. Hainu shalagabe hamahus. If we compare them to the mahus, to the substance, the essa spheres of the 10 spheres, which means the kalim, shehema kalim, which they are already. When we speak sphirot, we're speaking already of kalim. Shehema kalim, these are the vessels. And b'bchinas belima. Compared to that, they are considered without substance. And they're so substanceless that they can flip over from one side to the other side. They can switch. However, the kalim, they are really fixed and rigid in who they are and what they are. Einon mishtanim, they do not change. Mischalfen, they don't become switched over. Shammai's head and Hillel's head, as we discussed, never change. However, their ideas can sometimes switch. Like we gave earlier, we used the example of Shammai and Hillel. And the reason why the kalim are so fixed, but the lights are not, has to do with the source of where the vessels come from, and we can trace it all the way back to the original source as they are sourced in the Ein Sof. The Kalim are rooted in the Rishimu, and the Oiros are rooted in the Kav, and before the Kav is the thread of light of Ein Sof, and before the Kav in the Ein Sof. But as we're going to see in chapter 15, it's not in the ultimate purity of the Ein Sof, but rather a level of the Ein Sof that has already a connection to Spheris, to Sphiro, to attributes, as we shall see Be'ezrat Hashem in chapter 15. But the main distinction is that the Kalim, the Oiros, the lights are rooted in light, and the vessels are rooted in the Rishimu. And Rishimu is the power of Gevul, it's the power of limitation. And that's why the vessels are inherently limited, but not the lights. The Shoyrish HaKelim, this is actually we were holding. We even learned one more line. The Shoyrish HaKelim nimshachu maharishimu. The root of the Kelim comes from the Rishimu. And as we discussed earlier, what is the Rishimu? The Rishimu is, remember we said that after Hashem made the Tzimtzum, the contraction, and he removed the infinite light, there was a tiny, and he made this big black hole. In that blackness, little traces of light were left over, but the traces of light were not traces of the infinite. The traces of light that were left over was the traces of the Koach HaGvul, the power of limitation that was part of the Ein Sof. And remember, we learned how the Tzimtzum caused the differentiation. Until before the Tzimtzum, the power of the limitation, the self-limiting power of the Ein Sof, was not in any way differentiatable from the power of the Ein Sof of the Ein Sof, from the limitless power of the Ein Sof. Because the limitation, the self-limiting power of the Rishimu was then viewed as part of and as one of the limitlessness of God. Because God is so limitless, therefore, he includes within himself also the power to limit, but you didn't sense any limitation in that. That's why, in order for it to become a power of limiting, it needed to kind of separate from the limitlessness, and that's what the Tzimtzum accomplished. The contraction that contracted the infinite light allowed for the power for the Rishimu, for the power of self-limitation that God had to emerge and stand on its own. However, once we understand, that's called the Oisius Rishimu, the letters of the Rishimu, and we learned that that's the root of the Kalim. So since the Kalim come from a self-limiting power of God, that's why they are truly limited. As remember, we learned from the Avodas HaKodesh, we learned that line, V'hagvul hanimtza memenu itchila, the first gvul that comes from God are the Kalim of Atzilus. He says the Spheres of Atzilus, but we've explained earlier that that's referring to the vessels. The Shoyrish HaKelim nimshachu marishimu, the root of the Kalim comes from the Rishimu, Shoyrish kayach hagvul, which is the root of the power of limitation. Avol moyach stima da'atika. However, if you trace the lights of Atzilus, remember we said that the lights, especially when we spoke about Chachma, the light of Chachma, where does it come from? Chachma Ilah, the higher Chachma of Atzilus, where does it come from? From even a higher level called Moyach Stima. Moyach Stima means the concealed Molchin. That means the power of intelligence while it's still in Keter, while it's still in the Ein Sof. Now that's not Kalim, that's not vessels. What is that? That is the root of the light. That's what he's saying. But the hidden mochin, the hidden moyach of Atika, nimshach ma'akav, that comes not from the Rishimu, that comes from the Kav, that comes from the thread of the Ein Sof. After the Tzimtzum, after there was a contraction, Hashem re-shined again the original light, the infinite light, but he shined it again. He re-emanated that light, but in a controlled manner, in a kav, whatever that means. I'm sure we're going to have much more discussion about that kav. But as the kav emerged, the kav is a kav, not of Rishimu. The kav is a revelation of the Ein Sof. And that's where Moyach Stima of Atika comes from. That means that the Oros, the lights, they are plugged into the kav, not the Rishimu. Shu b'chenas ha'or, which is the light. Shu ha'oras Ein Sof baruch hu, which is a radiance of the Ein Sof. Ula maila maila, and therefore it is above mimohus hakelim, from the substance of the vessels. The vessels are a derivative from the Rishimu, which is a complete, right, which is another element opposite of the Kav. Kav is revelation. Rishimu is concealment. Rishimu is an element of, Rishimu is a product of the tzimtzum, but the Kav is not a product of the tzimtzum of the contraction. The Kav is a return to the Ein Sof. So, and therefore, anything that comes from the Kav is way above the Kalim. At shenikru etzlan, and therefore to the Kalim, the oirais are called, the lights themselves, belim ma, without substance. It's like they don't have any substance, no character. They are beyond all definitions and all character. The im calls it, but notwithstanding their loftiness, hen oirais to essa spheres mamish. They are still lights of 10 spheres, which means you can still count 10 in them. Well, if it would be utterly simple, there wouldn't be 10. The fact that there are 10, because in simple light, what would differentiate one from the other to make this one 1 and this one 2? It's all the same light. So we have to say that no, this is the light of Chachma, this is the light of Bina, this is the light of Chesed, this is the light of Tiferes, and so on and so forth. And that is because there is already a connection to some kind of it has already a leaning towards definition. What does that mean? Shagamba oiros yesh esa spheres. That even in the lights there are 10 spheres mamish. V'shaychem, and therefore, you cannot. Therefore, we can't apply this to the pure Or Ein Sof. But hold it, didn't we say that the lights come from the Ein Sof? Yes, they do. They come from the Kav. The Kav, although the Kav is a reintroduction of the Ein Sof, but not the Ein Sof of the Ein Sof. A lower level of the Ein Sof, as we will now begin to explore in the next chapter. V'shaychem rak b'bchenas hakav. And this idea that the lights are slightly colored, slightly, so benign that we call them without substance. You wouldn't even notice. So benign that they can flip from where they can appear like this and it can appear like that tomorrow. They are so free and so abstract. But they're already leaning towards definitions, and that's because they come from the Kav. Rak b'bchenas hakav. This level of light that has a shaykhis, that has some kind of a relationship to kelim, to vessels, is only possible in the Kav. V'chut, and this little thread, hanimshach ma'or Ein Sof baruch hu, that comes from the Or Ein Sof. So even though it comes from the Or Ein Sof, we will see in the next chapter, they come from a more external revelation of the Or Ein Sof, which is called, I'm going to throw the word right now, we're going to be very busy with it for a long time, Eser Spheres Hagnuzais. They are called the 10 concealed spheres that are concealed in the Or Ein Sof. So in the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, there is a concept of 10 hidden spheres. That's the origins of the light of the Kav. So when the Kav comes out, it's already coming in a manner where it's predisposed to express itself in 10 different ways. Although when you look at the light, you won't see it at all. But it is already predisposed to particular 10 different manifestations. Because they come from the Esa Spheres Hagnizos B'Matzilon, the 10 spheres that are concealed in their matzil, in their emanator. Hold on till after the Kitzur, when we will address that, when we start chapter 15. Now let's do the Kitzur on 14. The Yuvan Zalamayla, we'll understand this above. The Marsha Omer is all going back to the beginning of chapter 14, when he was trying to explain how the origins of intelligence are also intelligence, but a different type of intelligence, so different than the intelligence once they go into Kalim. That's what we learned in chapter 14. That once things go into Kalim, they're so different. When they go into vessels, they're so different when they are still beyond vessels. And he compared that, and he gave us the example of how Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the most intelligent being, who reached the highest level of divine intelligence, yet he was impossible to explain to him something that God had an explanation for, but it was from a world of intelligence that was not an intelligence, an intellectable intelligence that we know, because it was from the level of essential intelligence in the essence, not intelligence that is processed in the kelim, in the vessels. Remember how Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, "Shtok, be silent. Kach ola b'machshava." This has arisen in my thought. He doesn't say this is what has arisen in my desire, meaning to say it's just a plain desire that I have that I can't explain. There is an explanation here, but it's not it's not in any world of explanation that anybody can explain other than my essential intelligence. It's above divine intelligence. It's above divine kalim, but it's in the essence of intelligence. He says there is a hidden reason over there. But to the level of chachma, to the level of wisdom, when it's from the perspective of vessels, it feels like it's utterly above intelligence. Compared to the light of the chachma of Atzilus, not just to the kelim of Atzilus, but even to the light of chachma of Atzilus, because when the light of chachma of Atzilus goes into the vessels, it becomes already limited in accordance to the vessels. And the example we used was just like the intelligence of the soul before it came into a body. Remember, the way we perceive things before we go into a body, our soul has a whole different level of intelligence. Her seichel, or understanding and a grasping, is considered completely above the intelligence, and compared to the intelligence, like when we are thinking through the gray matter of our head. But yet we all understand that even though we might look at it and not be able to comprehend its intelligence, but we understand that it is intelligence, v'chachma, and understanding, and even more, the intelligence of our soul, when our soul was not in a body, is the source of our intelligence that we are experiencing in our body. That's where it comes from. But yet, we wouldn't even be able to relate to it at all. It's the source for the revealed intelligence. Yet it is so lofty and so high that we wouldn't even call it by the same name. Okay. So the same as above, we said. That by God, there is the chachma, the intelligence, and for the same argument, all the sfirot, they exist in the keter, in the crown. But even when they're there, we can detect, there are already Sfirot, there are already Chachma of Keser, that's called Chachma Stima. There's the Chesed of Atik Yomin, which is Chesed. And it's precisely blaming it, let's blame it on that, precisely because it is already Chachma or Chesed or Bina in the most subtlest and abstract way, but yet it is already that. That's why when it goes into the vessels, it will become very vesselabilized, if you might say, and defined by the vessels. And because the source is chachma, is wisdom l'chein, therefore, when it emanates a light, when its light goes into a vessel, then the keli will grab onto it, the vessel will grab onto this energy and make it, downgrade it to be similar to the vessel. But yet, that's on the one hand. Since, again, what he's basically saying about the source of all these sfirot is they are and they're not. They're both. They are and they're not. As long as we remember that. They are yet and no. So now we explain the yet part. They are chachma, and what's the derivative? What's the consequence of it being chachma? That when its light will go into a vessel, it will become grasped by the vessel, and it will be tainted by the vessel. But on the other hand, it's also not chachma. It's so simple, and for that reason, it can exchange colors. It can be white and red and blue. It's switchable. And just like the source, even though it is chachma, it is simple. So to the light and essence, the light also, not just the makar, not the source, but even the light emanating from the source remains colorless, is considered belima, without substance, legabe yakelim, to the vessels, until they go into the vessels. Once they go into the vessels, it becomes like the vessel. This that we say that even the lights are not compared to their source, yet their incomparability to their source is very different than the incomparability of the vessels. The vessels are a complete different beast, if you might say. They are a complete different type of entity. The lights, although, the fact that it's a light, it's not the essence, is already different than the source, but it's still closer to its source. It reflects the source. How does it reflect the source? It is very simple and pure until it goes into the vessels. And before it goes into the vessels, because it is so pure, it can switch over and look every day different. But the conclusion of this is that in the lights as well, the lights of the 10 spheres of Atzilus are called 10 spheres. But at the same time, they're called belima, without substance, when we compare them to the vessels. Okay. Now that we've finished chapter, that's a siyum, that's the conclusion on chapter 14. And now, v'yashloima, we can say that, what can we say? Shazao gam kain inyan esa spherois haganuzois b'matzila. We begin chapter 15. This is also the idea of the 10 sephirot that are hidden in their emanator. So there is a concept where this idea originates is an early Kabbalistic writing. I'm not sure where. I'll look it up tomorrow because I'm not using the version of the book that has the footnotes on the bottom. But there is a concept brought in Kabbalah that we speak of 10 sefirot. That's the sefirot as they manifest and as they are projected. But then we say that the 10 spheres, they're hidden in their emanator. There is a level of 10 spheres that are in their emanator. So what is the emanator? That's Or Ein Sof. That's the infinite light. Even before the tzimtzum, shalifnei ad tzimtzum, even before the tzimtzum, we can talk about 10 spheres. In other words, we shouldn't think that 10 spheres only start after the tzimtzum. There is, which would make all the sense to say that, because in order to have sphirot, we need to have rishimu, and because only the rishimu can produce the kelim, can produce the vessels, as we discussed. But the rishimu, these hidden letters, the powers of limitation of God, are indifferentiatable. They don't have any existence before the tzimtzum, because before the tzimtzum, they're all part of the Ein Sof. So then, how can you talk about 10 spheres? There's no 10 spheres there. Since there's no letters of the rishimu that are in place to kind of begin the process of giving a shape and form of letters and of definitions and of boundaries. Yet, we're saying that's true. In order for Kalim to happen, the vessels to happen, yes, that can't be till after the tzimtzum. But however, the lights, the shirish of the 10 spheres, the root of the 10 spheres as they are in the lights, that's before the tzimtzum. Why? Because even before the tzimtzum, there is, in the light itself, there is a concept of 10 spheres that are genizes b'matzilon, in their emanator. V'hainu, what does that mean? And that's the source of the kav. Remember, the kav is interesting. On the one hand, what's this kav? Kav is called a thread. But if it's a thread of Ein Sof, so how can you be a thread of Ein Sof? Ein Sof means limitless. How can you be a thread of the limitless and just be a thread? If you're limitless, then you're infinite. What do you mean a thread? Just by saying kav and say that the kav it's a line of the Ein Sof is already a oxymoron. It's already two opposites. How can it both be a revelation of Ein Sof, but yet be a narrow thread? But now we're beginning to. But what were we saying? In the Ein Sof itself, the nether part of the Ein Sof, as we're going to see, is where the kav is coming from, is narrowed down to 10 sefirot, as opposed to the Ein Sof in its pure state. From there can be billions of spheros. The Ein Sof on its own can have infinite. When we say billions, I don't mean billions. I mean without an end sphere. The potential. Because it's Ein Sof. There's no end. In other words, really in essence, it's pashut, simple with utter simplicity. But its ability to manifest hypothetically, when we speak about 10 ways that God decided to emanate in, wisdom, kindness, well, those are the building blocks of existence. Everything that's in the cosmos is built on these 10, on the system of the 10. But hypothetically, God is not limited by that. And the true Ein Sof could have expressed himself in a billion, gazillion, endless sefirot. But we know that he didn't. So, the true Or Ein Sof, that's coming out from Atzmos, that's coming out from the essence, and that, over there we can say that from there can be Spherois Ein Kates. We'll see about that. There is such an expression. without an end spheres. But then we say that in the Ein Sof there are 10 sefirot that are hidden in him. That's because within the Ein Sof itself there are levels, even before the Tzimtzum. And I know it sounds like ridiculous. What do you mean? Before the Tzimtzum, it's all pure, just one revelation of Ein Sof. Yet no, even there is gradations. And there is a level where there is Ein Sof that is already predisposed to 10 spheroids. And when we speak of Kav, that when Hashem hid the light, and then he re-emerged the Kav is only tapping the external part of the Ein Sof, where there are 10 spheros, and that's why this Kav brings to the potential 10 spheros. And the spheros encates the infinite spherot that are the potential for limitless spheros are not within the Kav. The Kav does not have the ability to produce infinite spheros. The Kav has the ability to produce 10 spheros, because although it's a representation and a revelation of the Ein Sof, however, with certain guardrails, as we're going to see, like we see in the concept of Kav, as he says, "V'hainu shegam b'yois Kav," that even when the Kav was kolol adayin, still didn't emanate into the black hole, but rather the Kav was still included be'ha'or Ein Sof in the Or Ein Sof shalifnei hatzimtzum, before the tzimtzum, while it was still absorbed in the Ein Sof, shayach by esas spheres agnuzos. It has already within it has a connection to 10 spheres, sheheim shorshei ha'oros, which these 10 spheres are the roots that later will become the lights, not kalim. There's no vessels here, but the roots of the lights that we discussed earlier. That in Keter, in the crown, we spoke that there is already a subtle leanings to these different spheres. Now he says, hold it, let's take it. You have to catch our breath, he says, hold it. Now, the Kabbalists who knew of the concept of Esses spheres agnuzos were troubled by that. What do you mean 10 spheres of, what is this 10 spheres agnuzos? The 10 spheres that are hidden. So there is an argument between, I think, the Arizal and the Ramak. The Ramak learns that the 10 spheres hagnuzos, the hidden 10 spheres, is the source of the Kalim. In the Ein Sof, the source for the Kalim, for the vessels, are from the 10 spheres hagnuzos, from the hidden 10 spheres. But we're learning now, no, that the Kalim come from the Rishimo. Right? And we're saying now that the oiros, the lights of the 10 spheres, they too are 10. And what he's going to make the argument over here is that when we say Esa spheres agnizos b'matzilon, that the 10 spheres that are hidden in their emanator, that's the source of the lights, much deeper, much higher than the source of the Kalim. Okay, I know this is a lot to digest. We're going to break it down. That's what the Maamor does, piece by piece. We're going to go through it. The Pardes cuss of the Pardes. Who's the Pardes? Pardes is the Ramak, Rabbi Shekerdova. He writes, She'esa spheres agnuzos and shorshei hakelim. He says the 10 spheres that are hidden are the roots of the Kalim. But the oir, the lights, according to the Pardes, the lights are not colored at all. The lights are all pure. There's no coloring in the light. As he explains, if we're going to say that the lights of the 10 spheres are completely without substance, in other words, if we're going to negate everything we learned in chapter 12, 13, and 14, in this entire Maamor, if we're going to negate everything we learned, and we're going to insist that the lights are pure, utterly pure, then we have no choice, and we're going to say that the hidden 10 spheres, that's the root that eventually will produce the vessels, because the lights don't need a special source in the Ein Sof in which they have already 10 spheres. The lights are all a simple light. But now that we've established in the last 3 chapters that the lights are not utterly simple with complete simplicity, and they do have, in the most benign way, a relationship to already definitions. Therefore, we're going to up now the concept of Esses Spheros Agnuzos, the 10 spheres that are hidden b'matzilon, that it's not the source of the kelim, but it's the source of the lights. That's the point that he's making over here. If we say that the lights of the 10 spheres are without any mahus completely, if we're going to argue that the lights of the sphere, even the light that goes into the vessel, mamish, the light that becomes the soul of the vessel, if we're going to argue that those lights are pure with utter purity, and they are just as simple and definitionless like the Orin Sof himself, then you're right. Then we're going to have to say the Esespheres Agnuzos Hemshar Sheyakelim, that the 10 spheres that are hidden are the roots of the vessels, because the lights don't have in the lights there are no 10 spheres. The lights are just a simple light. But according to what we've learned earlier, what has been written earlier, that also in the lights of the Esespheres, Yeshloi Shayches Chachma v'Chesed, has a slight relationship to Chachma, to wisdom and kindness. The reason they're called without substance is Legaba HaKelim, the Esespheres, that's only when you're matching it up to the vessels of the 10 spheres. Im Kain, if so, Esespheres Agnuzos. So when we talk about the 10 spheres that are hidden, Shalamayla Maharishimu, that are higher than the Rishimu is the source of the Kelim. Heim Shar Sheya Oiros, the Esespheres Tatzilus. These are the roots of the lights of the 10, of the Oir. The emphasis is the lights of the 10 spheres of Atzilus. Aval, however, higher than that, Aval Or Ein Sof Atzmai, but the Or Ein Sof himself, not the 10 spheres that are hidden in their emanator, but the Or Ein Sof itself, Afilu Ha'or V'Hagilu Min Atzmos. Not just Atzmos, which is the essence, but even the revelation of Atzmos, which is the Or Ein Sof that comes out, Shubchinas Giluya Etzem, which is the revelation of the essence. Of course, that's not limited to 10 spheres. Harei Mufshit Legamri is completely above and removed Memohus Esa Spheres, from the substance of 10 spheres. The Einoi Shayach Sham B'chinas Spheres Klal. You can't even speak about spheres at all. It's beyond the entire concept of spheres. And even though we said earlier there is a concept called spheres in case, that there are infinite spheres, we're going to see soon that eventually we're going to get to it, that there are 3 levels. There's a level that we can't speak in the light, that we can't speak of any spheres at all. Then there is a level in which we can speak of spheres, but over there it's spheres without an end, Ein-Kate spheres. And then there's a 3rd level of the Ein Sof, which is still the infinite light. It's not the Rishimu. And over there it is 10 spheres, Hagenuzos b'matzilon, 10 spheres that are hidden in their mouth, where it gets narrowed down to 10. And that's where the Kav comes from. And that's where the Oiros, the lights, come from. And then these lights will settle in the vessels, which those vessels come from the Rishimu, which is another Inyan in the Ein Sof, as we shall still explore. Hopefully everybody will tune in to the next class as we continue this amazing learning. And meanwhile, let Mashiach be here today.